The leather chair in the mortgage broker's office squeaked softly as I shifted my weight, trying to find a comfortable position. At 28 years old, I was finally crossing the finish line of a marathon that had consumed my entire adult life. For 6 years, I had worked grueling 80-hour weeks as a software developer, living in a cramped, drafty studio apartment, eating cheap noodles, and aggressively funneling every spare dollar I earned into a high-yield savings account. My goal had never been luxury. I just wanted independence. The cashier's check resting on the polished mahogany desk in front of me was made out for $85,000, a full 20% down payment for a modest, quiet 3-bedroom starter home on the outskirts of the city. Mr. Henderson, a veteran loan officer with graying hair and a perfectly ironed collar, was typing rapidly on his keyboard. He had already reviewed my glowing letters of employment and my spotless banking history. "Everything on your income statements is impeccable, Maya," Henderson noted, adjusting his reading glasses as he waited for the internal bank network to load the final query. "We just need the federal credit bureaus to return your official FICO score, and we can lock in your interest rate today. The system usually takes just a few seconds to pull the tri-merge report." I smiled, feeling a rare, warm wave of genuine relief wash over my chest. I had played by the rules my entire life. I was the responsible, invisible daughter. I never asked my parents for a dime, mostly because they funneled every spare resource they had into supporting my 26-year-old brother, Chase. He was their undisputed golden child, a self-proclaimed lifestyle entrepreneur who hadn't held a steady paycheck since high school, yet somehow always wore designer silk shirts and drove leased European sports cars. Securing this house was my ultimate silent victory. The printer beside Henderson's desk hummed to life, sliding a thick stack of warm paper into the output tray. He picked up the top sheet, skimming the bold black text. His professional, welcoming smile vanished. Henderson stopped reading. He frowned deeply, his eyes darting back and forth across the page, before looking at me over the rim of his glasses. The sudden shift in his demeanor completely drained the warmth from the small office, leaving a heavy, suffocating tension in its place. "Maya," Henderson started, his voice dropping into a cautious, highly restricted tone. He sounded like a doctor preparing to deliver a terminal diagnosis. "Did you recently co-sign a major real estate investment, or perhaps omit a secondary property from your loan application?" "Excuse me?" I asked, my brow furrowing in confusion. "No, I've rented the same apartment for 6 years. I haven't even applied for a credit card in 3 years. Why?" Henderson slowly turned the printed document around, sliding it across the desk toward me. He tapped a heavily highlighted column near the center of the page with the tip of his pen. "Because the Federal Credit Bureaus just returned your score as a 410, Henderson stated cleanly, looking me directly in the eye. "According to Equifax and TransUnion, you currently hold an active $500,000 residential jumbo mortgage. It was originated exactly 6 months ago through an online shadow lender. The principal balance is $520,000. The air left my lungs. The blood roared so loudly in my ears that I could barely hear the hum of the office air conditioner. "And unfortunately, Maya," Henderson continued, his tone filled with professional pity, "the account is showing a severe 60-day delinquency warning. You have missed the last 2 mortgage payments. The lending bank has already initiated preliminary foreclosure proceedings. Because your name is listed as the primary borrower, this catastrophic default falls entirely on you. I cannot approve you for a starter home. Right now, legally, I couldn't even approve you for a basic auto loan." I pulled the paper closer, my fingers trembling slightly as my eyes scanned the dark ink. The loan was registered under my full legal name, my exact date of birth, my highly guarded Social Security number. "This is impossible," I whispered, the freezing reality of financial ruin sinking into my bones. I didn't sign for a $500,000 loan. I didn't undergo underwriting. Someone has stolen my identity. How could a bank approve this without me physically sitting in a room and signing a contract? Henderson leaned back in his chair, his posture stiffening into the rigid protocol of a financial investigator. The housing market regulations relaxed significantly regarding remote closings, Henderson explained, a grim edge to his voice. Someone bypassed the traditional in-person notary process by utilizing remote online notarization. If the applicant had physical possession of your Social Security card, your historical W-2 forms, and your previous tax returns, the automated underwriting software would simply process the digital signatures and wire the funds. Do you have any idea who might have access to your physical documents? The pieces snapped together with a sickening, crystalline clarity. 3 years ago, my father, Robert, who worked as a senior tax accountant for a corporate firm, had insisted on preparing my annual tax returns to save me the filing fee. I had handed him a folder containing my birth certificate, my physical Social Security card, and my employment history. He had kept photocopies of everything in his home office safe, claiming he needed them for his records. He had the exact, highly specific financial data required to fool an automated banking algorithm. I need the property address attached to that Vanguard Trust loan, I said. My voice didn't shake. The initial panic was gone, replaced instantly by a sharp, freezing, and ruthlessly analytical calm. Henderson typed a command into his terminal, pulling the public property registry tied to the fraudulent loan. He wrote the address on a sticky note and handed it to me. 1420 Crestview Drive. I didn't need to look it up on a map app. I already knew exactly what it looked like. It was a sprawling, modern craftsman luxury property located in Oak Hills, the most expensive and exclusive gated suburban neighborhood in the county. It was also the exact address printed on the heavy gold foil invitation sitting on my kitchen counter back at my apartment. My parents had been bragging for weeks to our entire extended family that Chase's new consulting startup had finally taken off, and he had purchased his dream estate to serve as his headquarters. They were hosting a lavish, catered housewarming party there that very afternoon. I had assumed they simply co-signed a lease for him. They hadn't. They had stolen my Social Security number, forged my digital signature, and hijacked 6 years of my hard-earned financial discipline to secure a luxury bachelor pad for a 26-year-old man who refused to work. And because Chase couldn't even cover the monthly installments, the loan was defaulting, permanently destroying my ability to buy my own modest home. I thanked Mr. Henderson, asked him to print every single page of the origination file, including the IP address logs for the digital signatures, and walked out to my car. By the time I pulled my 10-year-old sedan onto Crestview Drive, the sheer scale of their theft became fully visible. Number 1420 was a monument to unearned arrogance. It featured floor-to-ceiling glass windows, a 3-car garage, and a meticulously landscaped lawn. The long, circular driveway was packed with expensive luxury SUVs and imported sedans. A professional valet stand was set up near the front door. High-end catering staff in crisp white shirts carried silver trays of hors d'oeuvres through the open. Mahogany double doors. Upbeat lounge music echoed from the backyard patio. They were throwing a lavish party to celebrate their social status. And my stolen, ruined financial future was funding the open bar. I parked my car down the street, bypassed the valet attendant who tried to take my keys, and walked straight up the wide concrete steps, pushing through the heavy front doors. The interior was decorated with brand new, expensive leather furniture and modern art. 50 guests, mostly my parents' wealthy country club friends and Chase's frat brothers, mingled in the high-ceilinged living room, holding champagne flutes and laughing. I spotted my mother, Carolyn, standing near the sprawling marble kitchen island. She was wearing an elegant floral cocktail dress, holding a martini glass, and happily accepting compliments from her friends about her son's incredible entrepreneurial success. Standing next to her was my father, Robert, wearing a crisp-tailored navy suit. Chase was leaning against the marble countertop in a flashy designer silk shirt, loudly telling a story to his friends about how hard he worked to negotiate the closing price on the property. I walked directly through the crowd. My practical maroon blazer stood out sharply against the sea of expensive resort wear. The conversations around the kitchen island died down as I approached, the guests sensing the sudden drop in temperature. "Maya!" Caroline beamed, entirely oblivious to the cold, dead look in my eyes. She raised her martini glass, playing the role of the welcoming matriarch perfectly. "You finally made it. We were wondering if you were going to show up to celebrate your brother. Isn't the house simply stunning?" "It's a beautiful house, Caroline," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the background music. I pulled the folded Vanguard Trust origination file from my blazer and dropped it flat onto the marble island, right next to the imported cheese platter. "It's a shame you had to steal my social security number to buy it." The kitchen went dead silent. Several wealthy neighbors awkwardly lowered their drinks, their eyes darting between me and my parents. The jazz music playing from the patio suddenly felt entirely out of place. Chase's arrogant smirk faltered, his hand freezing halfway to his mouth with a drink. Robert's face instantly drained of color, his eyes locking onto the Vanguard Trust logo printed on the paper. Caroline didn't look guilty. She didn't drop her glass or break down in tears. She looked profoundly annoyed that I had interrupted her carefully curated social performance. "Keep your voice down, Maya. You are making a scene," Caroline hissed, stepping closer and attempting to push the document off the counter. "This isn't the time or the place. Go get a drink and mingle." "The time was 6 months ago when you forged my digital signature on a $500,000 mortgage application," I replied evenly, refusing to lower my voice or break eye contact. "You bypassed the electronic notary using the tax records Robert kept in his safe. You bought a luxury mansion in my name, and you haven't paid the mortgage in 2 months. I just got denied for my own home today because you destroyed my credit score down to a 410. "Oh, for heaven's sake, stop being so dramatic," Caroline snapped, completely abandoning her maternal persona. She took a sip of her martini and looked at me with cold, aristocratic disdain. She didn't deny the crime. She justified it right in front of her friends. "Your brother has a terrible credit score, and Robert and I weren't going to ruin our own financial standing by co-signing a high-risk loan for a bachelor pad," Caroline scoffed, adjusting her floral dress. "You have perfect credit, and you just sit in that tiny apartment hoarding your money. We raised you, Maya. We paid for your braces, we fed you, and we put a roof over your head. You owe us a house. We used your numbers to get Chase started. We were going to catch up on the payments eventually. You missed 2 payments because you prioritized hiring a caterer and a valet service for a housewarming party over paying the bank," I summarized, ensuring every single guest heard the exact mechanics of their twisted financial priorities. "It's family business. The family shares its wealth," Robert interjected, stepping forward and using his stern, patriarchal tone to try and bully me into submission. He pointed a rigid finger at the front door. "You will go home, calm down, and keep your mouth shut. If you dare call the local police over this and embarrass us, we will cut you off completely. You will be dead to this family." I looked at the 3 of them. I didn't throw a tantrum over my ruined credit. I didn't beg them to pay the past due balance. "Enjoy the party," I said quietly. I turned my back and walked out the front doors, leaving the silent, awkward crowd behind me. They thought they had trapped me. They assumed the threat of being disowned would force me to absorb a $500,000 fraudulent debt in silence to keep the peace. They genuinely believed that going to the local municipal police station would result in a bored patrol officer declaring it a civil family dispute. They completely forgot that stealing a Social Security number to execute a fraudulent residential loan across a federally insured banking network isn't a local police matter. It is a severe federal felony. I sat down in the driver's seat of my sedan, locked the doors, and pulled out my laptop. I didn't dial 911. I opened the encrypted reporting portal for the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division and the Office of the Inspector General for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. I began uploading the IP addresses, the forged digital signatures, and the exact coordinates of the catered housewarming party. The interior of my 10-year-old sedan was suffocatingly warm, but I deliberately kept the engine off. I needed complete, uninterrupted silence. Parked under the heavy, sprawling branches of an oak tree half a block down the street, I had a clear line of sight to the towering modern craftsman mansion at 1420 Crestview Drive. Through my windshield, I watched the catered housewarming party seamlessly transition into its evening phase. The faint, upbeat rhythm of a live jazz quartet drifted down the manicured block, mingling with the polite, high society laughter of my parents' wealthy friends. I didn't hit the steering wheel in frustration. I didn't break down weeping over my ruined credit score. The initial shock of discovering my 410 FICO rating had completely burned off, leaving behind a cold, highly efficient state of analytical focus. I unzipped my work bag, pulled out my laptop, and rested it against the steering wheel, tethering the internet connection to my cell phone's secure cellular hotspot. My parents had built their entire arrogant defense on the assumption that the justice system operated like a customer service desk. They genuinely believed that if I walked into a local municipal police precinct, a bored desk sergeant would glance at the complicated mortgage paperwork, label it a messy, civil probate issue, and tell me to hire a family lawyer. They thought the social pressure of a crowded room, combined with the threat of being cut off from the family, would force me to quietly absorb a $500,000 default. They failed to understand the actual mechanics of the crime they had committed. Stealing a physical credit card from a purse is a local police matter. Stealing a Social Security number to forge a digital signature and secure a jumbo residential loan from a federally insured lending institution is a direct violation of Title 18 United States Code, Section 1344 Bank Fraud. I bypassed the local 911 dispatch entirely. I opened my web browser and navigated straight to the encrypted reporting portal for the Office of the Inspector General for the ADV, Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD-OIG, simultaneously linking the submission to the White-Collar Crime Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. My fingers moved across the keyboard with the practiced efficiency of a software developer debugging a critical system error. I didn't type out an emotional, weeping plea. I built a clinical, undeniable paper trail. I uploaded high-resolution PDF scans of every single page Mr. Henderson had printed for me. I attached my actual W-2 forms, my legitimate tax returns, and my current apartment lease to prove my physical residence for the past 6 years. Then I uploaded the digital signature origination logs from the Vanguard Trust file. When Robert bypassed the online notary to forge my signature on the closing documents, he hadn't used a sophisticated VPN or a secure proxy server to mask his location. He was an arrogant corporate tax accountant who genuinely believed his own daughter would never dare audit his actions. Buffers. Automated DocuSign software had permanently stamped the digital contract with his exact unalterable IPv4 network address. I ran a quick public registry trace on the IP address. It didn't point to my cramped studio apartment. It resolved directly to the commercial Comcast router registered to Robert Vance, located at my parents' 4-bedroom suburban home 15 miles away. He had literally sat at his home office desk, connected to his personal Wi-Fi, and typed my Social Security number into a shadow lender's portal to hijack my credit profile. Furthermore, the 20% down payment required to close on the mansion hadn't materialized out of thin air. The bank routing numbers listed in the wire transfer logs perfectly matched the joint checking account belonging to Robert and Caroline. They had paid the down payment from their own pockets, but forced the $500,000 legal liability and the catastrophic monthly interest onto my stolen identity to protect their own immaculate credit ratings. I compiled the IP logs, the routing numbers, and the forged documents into a single encrypted PDF. I typed a brief summary of the identity theft, explicitly noting that all 3 suspects were currently gathered at the fraudulently purchased property, and hit submit. A green confirmation checkmark appeared on my screen, generating a priority federal tracking number. A web form alone wouldn't trigger an immediate response. I needed human intervention. I picked up my phone, dialed the direct line for the regional FBI field office, and navigated the automated menu until a duty agent in the white-collar crime division answered the line. "Agent Reynolds," a deep, tired voice announced. "My name is Maya Vance," I stated, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "I am calling to escalate IC3 complaint number 884-Delta. I have uploaded physical proof of an active $500,000 residential mortgage fraud, aggravated identity theft, and federal wire fraud perpetrated against my Social Security number." I heard the rapid clicking of a keyboard on Reynolds' end as he pulled up the file. The typing stopped abruptly. "You obtained the digital signature logs from the originating bank?" Reynolds asked, his voice losing its tired edge, instantly sharpening into professional focus. "Miss Vance, this IP routing data connects the fraudulent application directly to your father's residence. The down payment was wired from his personal checking account." "Yes," I confirmed. "My father is a senior tax accountant for a corporate firm. He retained physical copies of my birth certificate and W-2s from a previous tax filing to bypass the automated underwriting process. The loan is currently 60 days delinquent. The primary reason I'm calling right now is location and evidence preservation." "Explain," Reynolds instructed. "The fraudulent loan was used to purchase a luxury property at 1420 Crestview Drive," I said, watching a valet attendant park another, imported SUV in the driveway. "The primary suspects, my father, my mother, and my brother, who is the sole resident of the stolen property, are currently hosting a catered housewarming party at that exact address with 50 guests. My father knows I have discovered the fraud. He is a corporate accountant. He has the technical capability to wipe his home servers, destroy his digital paper trail, and attempt to liquidate the property." A heavy silence fell over the line. In the realm of federal law enforcement, a suspect with financial expertise, advanced warning, and $500,000 in stolen assets is classified immediately as a high-risk flight, an evidence destruction variable. "Do not approach the residence, Miss Vance," Reynolds commanded, the bureaucracy shifting gears into a tactical response. "Maintain your distance. We are deploying an evidence recovery team and securing the perimeter." I lowered the phone, resting my head against the warm glass of the driver's side window. Inside the mansion, completely oblivious to the federal crosshairs locking onto their location, the celebration of unearned wealth was reaching its peak. Through the large floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the living room, I could clearly see Chase standing on the raised hearth of the modern fireplace. He tapped a silver spoon against his champagne flute, commanding the attention of the crowded room. The jazz band smoothly faded out. The wealthy country club guests turned toward the golden child, raising their glasses in anticipation. "I just want to say a few words," Chase began, projecting his voice with the practiced, effortless confidence of a man who had never faced a single consequence in his entire 26 years. He smoothed the lapels of his crisp, light gray linen suit. "When I started my consulting firm, a lot of people told me that the market was too tough. They said you have to grind for decades in a cubicle just to get a piece of the pie." He paused, smiling. warmly at our mother, Carolyn, who was standing in the front row. She was beaming with toxic pride in her floral cocktail dress, wiping a theatrical tear from her eye. But I knew that if you just hustle, if you just visualize your success and refuse to take no for an answer, the universe rewards you, Chase continued, delivering a sickeningly hollow speech about work ethic while standing inside a $500,000 crime scene. This house isn't just a home. It's proof that hard work pays off. I want to thank my parents, Robert and Caroline, for believing in my vision, to family and to success. To success, the crowd echoed enthusiastically. Glasses clinked together. Robert puffed out his chest in his tailored navy suit, patting his son on the back. They were drowning in their own manufactured glory, deeply convinced that throwing me out the front door had permanently solved their problem. They didn't hear the deep, synchronized rumble of heavy diesel engines turning onto Crestview Drive until it was entirely too late. There were no warning sirens. Federal tactical teams do not announce their arrival when securing a perimeter for a white-collar raid involving potential evidence destruction. I sat up straight in my car, watching through the rear-view mirror as a convoy of 3 unmarked black Chevy Suburbans and a dark green, heavily armored tactical transport vehicle rolled silently down the wealthy suburban street. They moved with predatory precision, bypassing the line of parked luxury cars. The armored transport swerved aggressively onto the manicured green lawn of number 1420. Crushing a row of expensive imported rose bushes beneath its heavy reinforced tires. The 3 Suburbans formed a tight barricade across the circular driveway, completely boxing in the professional valet stand. The valet attendant dropped a set of Mercedes keys onto the pavement, his jaw falling open in sheer shock. The heavy steel doors of the vehicles opened in perfect unison. The quiet, wealthy neighborhood was instantly overwhelmed by the sharp, rhythmic thud of tactical boots hitting the asphalt. 12 heavily built federal agents stepped out into the evening air. Because the property was sprawling, crowded with unknown guests, and required immediate securing, the FBI had deployed a regional SWAT element to execute the search and seizure warrant. They wore dark green Kevlar vests, heavy tactical helmets, and carried standard-issue rifles slung securely across their chests. The bright yellow letters FBI SWAT were stenciled across their backs, providing a terrifying contrast to the serene, affluent surroundings. They didn't ring the doorbell. They didn't wait for an invitation. The lead tactical agent marched straight up the wide concrete steps, his heavy boots echoing loudly, and pushed firmly through the mahogany double doors, stepping directly into the crowded, high-ceilinged living room. The jazz band stopped playing instantly. A catering. Waiter, startled by the sudden influx of heavily armed men, dropped a silver tray of crab cakes. The metallic clatter against the marble floor rang out like a gunshot in the sudden, suffocating silence. 50 wealthy guests froze in place, their champagne flutes hovering awkwardly in the air, staring in horrified confusion at the federal law enforcement officers flooding into the luxury bachelor pad. "Federal agents! Nobody moves! Step away from the exits and keep your hands visible!" The lead agent's voice boomed over the crowd, carrying an uncompromising authority that completely shattered the illusion of Chase's entrepreneurial empire. Chase stood frozen on the raised hearth of the fireplace. His arrogant, confident smirk evaporated in a microsecond, his face turning the color of wet ash. The light gray linen suit suddenly looked incredibly fragile. Robert, entirely blinded by decades of country club privilege, genuinely believed he could manage the situation like a corporate boardroom dispute. He adjusted his navy suit jacket, forced a tight diplomatic smile, and took a confident step toward the lead tactical agent. "Officer, there is clearly a misunderstanding here," Robert announced, attempting to project his deep patriarchal authority over the room. "I am a senior tax partner at Vance and Associates. This is a private residence, and we are hosting a private event. Whatever municipal permit issue you are investigating, my attorneys can handle it quietly on Monday morning. You are frightening our guests." The lead agent didn't smile. He didn't lower his weapon. He looked directly at Robert, his eyes narrowing with the cold calculation of a man who dealt with white-collar criminals every single day. "We aren't here for a municipal permit, Mr. Vance," the agent replied, his voice echoing cleanly off the expensive glass windows. "We are executing a federal search and seizure warrant for fraudulent financial documentation and securing this property under the authority of the United States Inspector General." The metallic clatter of the dropped silver catering tray echoed sharply across the high-ceilinged living room, hanging painfully in the sudden, suffocating silence. 50 wealthy guests dressed in expensive cocktail attire stood perfectly still among the modern leather furniture. A woman in a sparkling sequin dress nervously set her half-empty champagne flute down on a side table, taking a slow step backward away from the heavily armed federal agents securing the exits. Robert's tailored navy suit suddenly seemed entirely too tight. He blinked rapidly, his polished, confident country club demeanor cracking around the edges as he stared at the lead SWAT agent. The word federal was a direct, terrifying blow to the delicate manufactured illusion of success his family had spent years cultivating. "Federal search warrant?" Robert repeated, his booming voice dropping an octave, sounding tight and strained. He instinctively reached up to adjust his silk tie. "Officer, there must be a clerical error at the courthouse. We have not committed any financial crimes. I am a senior tax partner with an immaculate professional record. My son, Chase, is the legal owner of this property. His consulting firm purchased it last month. If there is a tax issue, I can pull the filings right now and clear this up. You are terrifying my guests over a simple bureaucratic mix-up." The lead tactical agent didn't smile. He lowered the barrel of his rifle slightly to a safe retention position, but his posture remained completely rigid, uncompromising, and deeply unimpressed by Robert's corporate titles. He pulled a thick, folded document from the cargo pocket of his dark green Kevlar vest. "We are fully aware of your employment status at Vance & Associates, Mr. Vance," the agent stated cleanly, his deep voice carrying effortlessly over the silent crowd of wide-eyed socialites. He unfolded the paper. "Which is exactly why a secondary digital forensics team is currently breaching your home office 15 miles away to secure your commercial servers and prevent the destruction of evidentiary IP routing logs." Robert's jaw dropped. The realization that federal law enforcement was currently tearing through his heavily guarded suburban home hit him like a physical blow. "My servers?" Robert choked out, his eyes widening in sheer terror. "You have no right. I handle sensitive financial data for high-net-worth clients. I have strict confidentiality privileges." "You surrendered those privileges the moment you utilized your personal residential internet connection to bypass a remote online notarization protocol," the agent replied smoothly, executing a lethal technical takedown. "We are executing an immediate seizure of this property under the authority of the Department of Housing and Urban Development Office of the Inspector General. We are acting on a priority referral for severe violations of Title 18, United States Code, bank fraud and aggravated identity theft." Caroline, who had been beaming with toxic maternal pride just 3 minutes earlier, let out a sharp, breathless gasp. She gripped the edge of the marble kitchen island to steady herself, the color rapidly draining from her face beneath her elegant, floral cocktail dress. "Identity theft?" Caroline whispered, her aristocratic facade crumbling as her country club friends exchanged horrified, knowing glances. She desperately attempted to deploy her last remaining line of defense, the toxic suburban entitlement she always used against me. "Wait, this is about Maya, isn't it? That selfish, vindictive little liar. Officer, listen to me. This is a private family dispute. We raised her. We paid for her food and clothing for 18 years. The family shares its wealth. We simply borrowed her credit score for a few months to help her brother get his business off the ground. It isn't a federal crime to help your own son." A low murmur of genuine, disgusted shock rippled through the gathered crowd. "Maya," the president of Caroline's exclusive country club whispered loudly from the back of the room, turning to her husband with a look of pure revulsion. "Isn't that their older daughter? The software developer they always complain about?" Caroline's face flushed a deep, humiliating crimson. The illusion was dead. The neighbors she had spent decades trying to impress were currently watching her actively confess to stealing her own daughter's identity in front of federal law enforcement. The lead agent slowly looked from Caroline to Robert, his eyes narrowing with a cold, professional disdain that cut deeper than any yell or threat. Ma'am, utilizing a stolen Social Security number and physical tax records to electronically forge a digital signature and secure a $520,000 jumbo residential mortgage across state banking lines is not a family dispute, the agent stated, tightening the bureaucratic noose. It is a Class B federal felony. And considering the loan is currently in severe delinquency, you haven't just borrowed a credit score. You have actively defrauded a federally insured lending institution. Chase stood entirely frozen on the raised stone hearth of the modern fireplace. He looked down at the champagne flute still clutched tightly in his hand. The 26-year-old golden child who had just delivered a nauseatingly arrogant speech about hustling and visualizing success was suddenly faced with the crushing reality of a federal penitentiary. He didn't step forward to defend his father's professional record. He didn't try to protect his mother from the harsh glare of social humiliation. The illusion of his luxurious, work-free future evaporated instantly, replaced by pure terror. He immediately activated his deeply ingrained survival instinct, rapid, cowardly betrayal. "I didn't do it! I didn't sign anything!" Chase yelled, his voice cracking loudly as he practically threw his crystal champagne flute onto the carpet. He frantically raised both hands in the air, backing up until his shoulders hit the decorative stone wall. He pointed a trembling finger directly at his own horrified parents, standing near the kitchen island. It was his idea. Dad is the accountant. He took her tax returns from his safe. Mom paid the down payment. I just wanted a nice house to launch my consulting firm. I didn't forge the digital signatures. They did it. Arrest them. "Chase, how could you?" Caroline sobbed, her jaw dropping in horrified disbelief. She stared at the son she had just committed a severe federal felony to spoil. The matriarch who had proudly bragged about his success was now being thrown under the bus by the very child she had protected his entire life. "Shut up, Mom. I'm not going to federal prison for a stupid house," Chase shrieked, his face slick with a cold sweat. He desperately turned toward his frat brothers, searching for any remaining shred of social validation. "Tell them, guys. I didn't know the loan was fake. I'm a victim here." His friends silently turned their heads, staring at the floor or looking out the windows, completely abandoning him to the federal justice system. "He's lying. He begged us for this property. He said he needed a luxury headquarters to project success to his clients," Caroline wailed, completely abandoning her dignified posture and pointing an accusing finger right back at her son. "We risked everything for you, Chase. You ungrateful brat. We ruined your sister's life for you. And you successfully executed a conspiracy to commit wire fraud," the lead agent noted cleanly, his voice cutting through the screaming match. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. The sheer weight of the federal penal code did the talking for him. He gestured sharply to the heavily built tactical agents fanning out across the room. Robert instinctively took a slow step backward, raising his hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender. The arrogant, booming patriarch who had threatened to cut me off from the family 20 minutes ago, was completely, irrevocably broken in front of his peers. "Officers, please," Robert stammered, his eyes wide with panic as a SWAT agent stepped aggressively toward him. "I am a senior tax partner. My firm will fire me. I will be disbarred. We are a wealthy family. We will call the bank right now and pay the 2 months of past due mortgage. We will fix the credit score. Just tell us how much the federal government wants in fines." "Sir, turn around and place your hands behind your back," the SWAT agent commanded sharply, his heavy hand dropping to his utility belt. "You cannot write a check to buy your way out of aggravated identity theft." "No, wait, I have connections. I know the local judges," Robert begged wildly, desperately looking over his shoulder at the silent, horrified crowd of wealthy guests. He was searching for an ally, a country club friend to vouch for his character. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody said a word. The heavy metallic clatter of steel handcuffs unspooling from a tactical belt echoed sharply across the ruined housewarming party. The agent forcefully grabbed Robert's right wrist, wrenching his arm firmly behind his back over his crisp, tailored navy suit, and secured it with freezing steel. The ratcheting click of the metal teeth engaging finalized his total social destruction. "Robert, do something! He's hurting me!" Caroline screamed in terror near the kitchen island as a second agent firmly grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the marble counter. She thrashed against the hold, her elegant floral dress twisting as the agent efficiently crossed her wrists at the small of her back. Chase pressed himself harder against the stone fireplace, watching his parents get handcuffed in the middle of his stolen bachelor pad. He was trembling so intensely that the lapels of his light gray linen suit were shaking. "Mr. Vance," the lead agent addressed Chase directly, stepping up to the raised hearth. "You physically signed the state property registry and the local utility contracts claiming legitimate ownership and primary residence of an estate funded entirely by illicit wire transfers. You also actively utilize the stolen asset for commercial business purposes. You are an active accessory to federal bank fraud." "No, please, I just moved in," Chase gasped, shutting his eyes tightly as a third pair of steel handcuffs ratcheted loudly around his wrists. The man who had demanded a $500,000 mansion to project success on Instagram was read his Miranda rights in front of every single person he had tried to impress. From my parked car half a block down the street, I sat perfectly still, watching through the windshield as the heavily armed federal agents marched my screaming mother, my sobbing father, and my cowardly brother out the front doors of the luxury mansion. They dragged them directly past the silent valet stand, past the rows of imported luxury cars, and shoved them into the back of the waiting tactical vehicles. The flashing red and blue law enforcement strobes painted the manicured lawn, signaling the end of their unearned empire. They thought my dedication to my career made me an easy, silent target. They completely forgot that a woman who works 80 hours a week to build her own independence doesn't negotiate with thieves. The heavy steel doors of the federal tactical transport vehicle slammed shut with a deep, echoing thud that rolled down the quiet, affluent suburban street. The flashing red and blue law enforcement strobes painted the paralyzed faces of the country club guests standing near the valet stand. I sat perfectly still in the driver's seat of my 10-year-old sedan, my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. I watched the convoy of unmarked black SUVs smoothly reverse off the ruined, manicured lawn of 1420 Crestview Drive, carrying my handcuffed, humiliated family directly toward the Federal Processing Center. Back at the mansion, the 50 wealthy attendees were awkwardly and hastily attempting to leave the crime scene. The professional valet attendant, looking completely shell-shocked, was practically sprinting to retrieve expensive imported cars for frantic neighbors who desperately wanted to distance themselves from the catastrophic social fallout of an FBI raid. The jazz band had silently packed up their instruments and slipped out the back gate. The lavishly catered housewarming party, funded entirely by my stolen financial future, was officially over. I didn't feel a sudden rush of triumphant joy. I didn't roll down my window to mock my parents' friends as they drove away in a panic. I was simply exhausted. When you spend 6 years working grueling 80-hour weeks to build an honest life, only to discover your own parents systematically robbed you to build a vanity project for an unemployed sibling, the emotional detachment is immediate and permanent. I disconnected my laptop from the cellular hotspot, placed it securely back into my work bag, turned the ignition key, and drove the 15 miles back to my cramped, drafty studio apartment in complete silence. 4 hours later, I was sitting at my small kitchen table, staring blankly at the $85,000 cashier's check that was supposed to secure my independence. I was meticulously organizing the physical copies of my legitimate W-2 forms, preparing a formal sworn affidavit for the federal prosecutor detailing exactly how Robert had manipulated his position as my former tax preparer to execute the identity theft. The silence of my apartment was abruptly shattered by the sharp, rhythmic ringing of my cell phone resting near my coffee mug. I picked it up and glanced at the glowing screen. The caller ID didn't display my father's name or his contact photo, his sleek, encrypted corporate smartphone, along with my mother's designer device and my brother's expensive phone, was currently logged into an evidence locker at the regional FBI white-collar crime field office for forensic digital extraction. The screen simply displayed an unknown toll-free number originating from a secure institutional exchange. I swiped to accept the call, tapped the speakerphone icon, and set the device flat on the wooden table. This is a prepaid collect call from an inmate at the Federal Metropolitan Detention Center. An automated synthetic female voice announced, the tone entirely stripped of human empathy, erasing every single ounce of corporate dignity my father had ever possessed. To accept this call and acknowledge that this conversation is subject to federal monitoring and recording, press 1. I pressed 1. A sharp electronic beep echoed against my apartment walls. Maya! Robert's voice crackled harshly through the receiver. The deep, booming, patriarchal authority he had, weaponized for decades to control our family, was completely gone. He sounded breathless, thin, and entirely hollowed out by the humiliating acoustic echo of a concrete federal holding cell. He was yelling frantically to be heard over the chaotic, metallic background noise of other inmates using the mounted wall phones in the processing block, accompanied by the distant clatter of heavy steel gates sliding shut. "Are you insane?" Robert bellowed into the plastic receiver, his panic spiking into a hysterical pitch as he desperately tried to reclaim his authority over me from inside a cage. I am standing barefoot in line for a full federal strip search. They confiscated my watch, my belt, and my shoelaces. Your mother is having a nervous breakdown in the women's intake block because they made her remove her jewelry, and Chase is crying hysterically in a holding cell wearing an orange paper suit. My senior partners at the accounting firm just saw my arrest broadcasted on the local evening news. The federal magistrate just denied our preliminary bail request because the digital forensic team is actively raiding my home office servers, making me an evidence-tampering risk. Do you have any idea what you have just done to this family? I didn't do anything to this family, Robert, I replied smoothly, keeping my voice perfectly flat and entirely devoid of emotion. I traced the edge of my coffee mug with my index finger. I simply filed a standardized identity theft report with the Department of Housing and Urban Development to correct a severe inaccuracy on my credit profile. It wasn't an inaccuracy. It's a piece of paper, Robert shrieked, aggressively slapping his open palm against the hard plastic divider of the prison phone bank. The dull thud carried clearly through the receiver, highlighting his total loss of physical control. You are acting like a selfish, vindictive brat. We didn't rob a bank. You were just sitting in that tiny apartment, hoarding your paycheck. You didn't even need the credit score right now. The family shares its wealth, Maya. Chase needed a luxury headquarters to secure high-net-worth consulting clients, and you were just being selfish. We didn't hurt anybody. We bought a house to keep your brother's business afloat. We were going to catch up on the missed payments eventually. If the family is supposed to share its wealth, I stated evenly, springing the psychological trap with cold, mechanical precision, directly addressing the core of their toxic entitlement. Then why didn't you and Caroline simply co-sign the jumbo mortgage for him using your own flawless corporate credit scores? There was a sharp, terrified silence on the line. The heavy, ragged breathing of my father trying to process the exposure of his own staggering financial hypocrisy echoed through the speaker. He had spent his entire life lecturing me about financial responsibility, and I had just cornered him with his own logic while the federal recording system captured every word. I had to protect our own financial standing, Maya, Robert stammered, his voice dropping into a defensive, pathetic whisper as he actively confessed to his predatory mindset. Your mother and I worked hard for our lifestyle. Chase's consulting firm isn't generating revenue yet, and we knew he was going to be completely unreliable with the monthly installments. If he missed a payment, a $500,000 debt delinquency would have ruined our ability to refinance our own home. We couldn't assume that level of risk at our age. We needed your blank credit history because it was a clean slate to absorb the liability. It was a necessary sacrifice for the family. And you successfully destroyed that clean slate down to a 410 by CO score, I noted quietly, entirely unbothered by his panic, the disgust settling heavily in my voice, because you explicitly decided your personal financial safety net, your luxury car leases, and your country club status were more important than your own daughter's ability to ever own a home. You have to stop this immediately, Robert screamed, entirely abandoning reason, assuming the federal legal system operated like a corporate HR department he could easily bully into submission. Call the FBI field office right now. Tell the lead agent that this is a huge family misunderstanding. Tell them you gave me verbal permission to use your physical W-2s to bypass that online notary. If we get formally charged with federal mortgage fraud, my accounting firm will fire me instantly. I will be permanently disbarred by the state accounting board. We will lose our house. You are ruining our lives over a stupid signature. I cannot call the FBI and tell them it was a mistake, Robert, I explained, leaning back against my wooden chair, staring at the ceiling of my cramped apartment. Because it wasn't a mistake. And even if I wanted to commit federal perjury and risk a 10-year sentence to protect a man who just intentionally ruined my life's work to shield himself from risk, the situation is completely out of my hands. The moment the automated banking network flagged a $500,000 fraudulent electronic signature originating across state lines, the incident escalated beyond a simple civil complaint into a priority federal criminal jurisdiction. What do you mean it's out of your hands? Robert whispered, his voice trembling visibly over the line. You are my daughter. Just drop the charges. I will call the shadow lender. I will force them to cancel the foreclosure proceedings and give you the credit score back. Please, I will pay the past due balance tomorrow morning. You cannot simply return a fraudulently purchased asset to avoid federal prosecution, Robert, I stated cleanly. And before you promise me administrative favors you don't actually possess, you might want to consider your upcoming civil liability. What are you talking about? Robert snapped angrily, his accountant brain desperately trying to calculate a way out of the trap. Because the primary fraud occurred across federally insured banking lines, the original lender has already triggered their corporate fraud insurance policy, I explained, my voice turning to pure ice. You bypassed a remote online notary protocol using stolen tax forms. You committed wire fraud. The bank is currently cooperating fully with the Inspector General." The line went completely dead silent. The chaotic noise of the prison holding area faded into the background as Robert processed the lethal arithmetic of his actions. "The FBI's digital forensics team is currently dismantling your home office servers, formally documenting every single IP routing log that connects you to the forged digital signature," I concluded smoothly, delivering the final bureaucratic blow. "And because Caroline is currently being processed on felony conspiracy charges alongside you, the federal government is legally required to liquidate 1420 Crestview Drive at auction to attempt to recoup the stolen funds. Because foreclosed properties rarely sell for full market value, the lending bank will suffer a devastating financial deficit." "They can't do that," Robert shrieked, his voice vibrating with hysterical, uncontrolled desperation. "The house is worth $500,000. The bank will get their money back." "It's not about the house, Robert," I corrected him softly. "It's about the deficiency judgment. When the bank auctions that property for a loss, they are going to legally subrogate the remaining debt directly against your personal 4-bedroom suburban home, your corporate pension, and your luxury car leases to cover the gap. You didn't just ruin my credit score." Robert let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. "When this is over, we are completely cutting you off from this family. Do you hear me? You are dead to us, Maya. Dead!" Robert roared into the plastic receiver, desperately trying to reclaim control through sheer, humiliating volume and empty threats. "Caroline already promised me that 4 hours ago at the party," I said quietly, flawlessly executing the lethal callback. I disconnected the prepaid institutional call, placed the phone face down on my scratched dining table, and finally allowed myself to rest. The line clicked and went dead. My cell phone rested silently against the worn grain of my small kitchen table, the distant echoing noise of the heavily secured federal processing lobby, where my father was frantically, pathetically trying to negotiate with a system that only understood hard numbers and concrete evidence, was permanently severed from the quiet sanctuary of my drafty studio apartment. I didn't feel a rush of euphoric victory. I was simply deeply, physically exhausted. When you deliberately steal your own daughter's Social Security number out of a home safe to forge a $500,000 mortgage application and stand in a crowded room, sipping martinis while claiming she owes you a luxury house because you fed her as a child, you don't get to hide behind the family shares its wealth defense when the Department of Justice finally calculates the receipt. I leaned back in my wooden chair, staring at the $85,000 cashier's check resting next to my cold coffee. My immediate financial plans were temporarily delayed, but my credit profile was now officially locked under federal investigation, protecting me from further liability. My ultimate closure was just beginning. I reached for my laptop, opened a fresh spreadsheet, and started methodically planning the restoration of my credit score. I didn't just wait for the federal agents to do the heavy lifting. I spent the next 3 weeks working directly with Mr. Henderson, meticulously compiling sworn affidavits, police report numbers, and fraud alerts to submit to Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. The process of untangling a stolen identity is incredibly grueling. Every single day required phone calls, notarized letters, and endless patience, all while knowing my parents were sitting in federal holding cells awaiting trial. Over the next 24 months, the federal justice system, the FBI's white-collar crime division, and the original lending institution executed a flawless, systematic dismantling of my family's entire manufactured life. They answered every arrogant threat my parents had ever made with strict, uncompromising judicial arithmetic, because I had secured the original tri-merge credit report directly from Mr. Henderson, and because the FBI digital forensics team successfully recovered the exact IP routing logs from Robert's seized home servers before he could delete them. Their high-priced corporate defense attorneys had zero leverage to negotiate. The federal prosecutor simply presented the undeniable paper trail connecting my father's corporate Wi-Fi network directly to the fraudulent digital signatures. The final nail in the coffin was the extensive body camera footage from the SWAT raid, capturing Caroline explicitly confessing to the crime in front of 50 wealthy country club witnesses. Robert, the booming patriarch who genuinely believed his accounting credentials made him an untouchable architect of the law, suffered a devastating, immediate professional and legal collapse. He was indicted for aggravated identity theft, bank fraud, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The state accounting board permanently revoked his CPA license, stripping him of his senior corporate partnership and effectively ending his career overnight. But the damage didn't stop there. The Internal Revenue Service, notoriously ruthless when dealing with wire fraud, initiated a full invasive audit on his accounting firm, uncovering years of minor tax discrepancies he had filed on behalf of his wealthy clients, his former country club friends, the very people who had stood in the living room and witnessed his arrest at the party, were suddenly subjected to grueling federal tax audits simply because of their professional association with him. He didn't just ruin his own reputation, he dragged his entire social circle into a federal tax nightmare. He became a total pariah in his own community. The federal judge, thoroughly disgusted by his calculated predatory exploitation of his own daughter to shield himself from financial risk, sentenced him to 84 months, a full 7 years, in a federal penitentiary. Caroline's untouchable suburban matriarch persona was completely and permanently dismantled under the harsh fluorescent lights of the federal courtroom. She was convicted of conspiracy to commit bank fraud and accessory to identity theft. Her defense attorney tried to argue that she was simply a passive bystander, unaware of the technical mechanics of the fraud. The judge immediately shut that down by playing the extensive body camera footage from the SWAT raid, explicitly citing her recorded, narcissistic claim that she was owed a luxury house because she provided basic parental care. She was sentenced to 60 months, 5 years, in a minimum security federal facility. The conviction triggered her immediate humiliating expulsion from her exclusive country club. The board of directors mailed the termination letter directly to her prison cell, officially isolating her from every single social circle she'd spent decades curating. Chase, the 26-year-old golden child who immediately threw his parents under the bus the second the SWAT boots hit his stolen teak floors, did not escape the blast radius. He tried to claim he thought the house was an early inheritance, but the federal prosecutor pointed out that he had physically signed the local utility contracts, the municipal water bills, and the property tax registry, claiming legitimate ownership of an estate funded entirely by a fraudulently obtained mortgage. He was convicted of accessory to bank fraud. He was sentenced to 48 months, 4 years, in federal prison. The self-proclaimed lifestyle entrepreneur who demanded a $500,000 luxury headquarters to project success on social media was legally forced to wear a high-visibility orange vest and spend 1,000 hours manually scrubbing graffiti off public transit stations and picking up trash along the federal highway system. Their financial ruin was the final devastating blow. The federal government and the banking sector do not negotiate with identity thieves. Because the $520,000 jumbo mortgage was obtained entirely through felony wire fraud, the lender officially initiated an accelerated foreclosure on the 1,420 Crestview Drive mansion. However, the luxury real estate market had cooled significantly. The bank auctioned the property off to a corporate buyer for only $400,000, resulting in a staggering $120,000 deficiency gap, compounded by tens of thousands of dollars in federal restitution fines, early termination fees, and legal penalties. Furthermore, Because Robert had bypassed standard banking protocols, the IRS classified the fraudulently obtained $500,000 as undeclared taxable income, burying them in evasion penalties. To cover the crushing deficit, the lending institution successfully filed a deficiency judgment directly against my parents' remaining assets. The court authorized the immediate seizure and liquidation of their beloved 4-bedroom suburban home. The United States Marshal Service arrived on a Tuesday morning, hammering a red foreclosure sign into the manicured lawn. They lost every single cent of their carefully hoarded wealth. Robert's entire corporate pension was seized. Their 2 leased luxury SUVs were repossessed from the driveway. They are entirely and permanently bankrupt, leaving prison with nothing but the clothes on their backs. With the federal investigation successfully concluded, the Office of the Inspector General issued a formal, binding decree to the credit bureaus. They officially wiped the fraudulent mortgage, the severe delinquency warnings, and the devastating hard inquiries from my profile. My FICO score was fully restored to an immaculate 810. 8 months later, I walked back into Mr. Henderson's office, handed him my $85,000 cashier's check, and used my hard-earned savings to purchase a beautiful, quiet 3-bedroom starter home on the edge of the city, completely free from their toxic influence. They thought they could use a stolen Social Security number and a toxic family communism excuse to hijack my life's work just so an entitled 26-year-old could throw a catered party for his frat brothers. They thought I would simply panic, surrender my financial future, and absorb a $500,000 debt to avoid embarrassing them at a housewarming event. They completely forgot that a woman who works 80 hours a week doesn't argue with thieves. I just uploaded the digital paper trail to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, drove to the party, and let a SWAT team hand them the receipt in front of the entire neighborhood. If your entitled family stole your Social Security number, forged a $500,000 digital mortgage in your name so your unemployed brother could buy a luxury mansion, and laughed in your face while drinking martinis at his catered housewarming party, would you have called the armed FBI SWAT agents to drag them out in handcuffs? Or would you have just surrendered your credit score to keep the family peace? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of federally enforced justice, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. See you in the next video.